Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Grand Admiral Thrawn's people, the Chiss, hailed from the remote unknown regions in the far peripherals of the galaxy. Although, of course, for the Chiss, they just called the region home. Now, these blue-skinned people dominated the unknown region, not through economic strength like the Republic, nor military projection like the Empire. Instead, they used subterfuge and illusions to craft a careful image of strength and power. For instance, the Chiss homeworld of Cilia had suffered a catastrophic shift in temperature. Basically, the entire planet was frozen over, although visitors were still led to believe that the planet was heavily populated and very prosperous. The population was officially stated as 8 billion, but the reality was there were maybe just 50 to 60 million people living in this planet, not on the surface, but in massive underground caves, usually filled with artificial sunlight, mountain ranges, and forest. Now, the Chiss did have a major spaceport on the surface of the planet, and they put a huge effort into making this area seem very lively with its own commercial and residential center, offices, and trade ports and stuff like that. And there was actually a rotation of people who had to brave the cold and live on the surface for a few weeks at a time and then return back to the comforts of their caves. The Chiss also had another really big secret. It was the fact that their species only had female force users, and these force users would oftentimes lose their power once they reached adulthood. And these force users were essential in allowing Chiss vessels to navigate through the chaotic hyperspace lanes in this area, which were always changing all the time because of wandering black holes, nebulas, and all sorts of gravitational anomalies. So essentially had to use the force to navigate, but no one knew the Chiss had their own force navigators. The reason why the Chiss had so many secrets was because they faced all sorts of unknown and newly encountered threats, wielding a wide variety of unconventional weapons and tactics. The Chiss were oftentimes making first contact, and a lot of those times, the species that existed in this part of the region were just heavily armed, chaotic, and savage. And so they had this policy of hiding what their true military strength was. Therefore, maintaining this air of superiority and, more importantly, secrecy over their military's capabilities was essential for the survival of the species. A young Thrawn in Legends would encounter a species known as the Vagari. After capturing one of their ships, the Chiss found a gravity well projector on board. This piece of technology could prevent ships from jumping into hyperspace and also pull them out of hyperspace. This basically allowed a military force to cordon off a battlefield and control what type of ships enter and leave. They could do the same thing for a system, and this is a very powerful tool to have in your arsenal. This weapon allowed the secretive Chiss to have more control over their encounters with enemy forces and prevent defeated foes from escaping, potentially eliminating future threats. Of course, you didn't have to be the Chiss to really appreciate the power, the tactical opportunities that this type of weapon provides for you. During the Old Republic era, the Republic Navy developed the Leviathan Interdictor Class cruiser, which was designed to ensnare targets and lock them in system while their banks of turbolasers rained heavy fire down on them. The gravity wells of that generation were quickly made obsolete by improvements in hyperspace technology and sensor suites, and basically, as the technology became outdated, it also became forgotten. For a pretty long time, like thousands of years. This technology would resurface during the High Republic era in a theoretical physics paper by Chancey Yarrow from the Academy of Carida. She was kind of a troublemaker. She was expelled for essentially lying about grant money she received. She used it to build a gravity well generator, which I guess her superiors frowned upon. After she left academia, Yarrow unfortunately developed a relationship with the Nile Marauders and would develop the Gravity's Heart, a gravity well projector weapon built into a space station. Further research and development by Yarrow would lead to the Storm Seed invention for the Nile. This was essentially a gravity projector mine that could destroy ships traveling in hyperspace. The Nile would use this technology to completely cut off entire portions of the galaxy from the High Republic. Had Yarrow's instructors in the Academy realized her potential as an engineer, a designer, a scientist, they could have seized this, spark of ingenuity, this technology for the good of the Republic, and this would have really aided judicial vessels, the Jedi in apprehending foes, and, doing all sorts of other peacekeeping work. That technology would have eventually fallen into the hands of the Empire much earlier on as well, mostly as a very functional device that had several generations of development and also mass production to make these things not only more efficient, more reliable, but also cheaper to build. Instead, the Empire barely started making prototypes of interdictor vessels when they took over, so it took quite a lot of time for them to catch up and regain the knowledge of how this technology worked, which would ultimately prove problematic when they deployed it. Inspired by the Old Republic Leviathan, and most likely by the storm seeds used by the Nile Marauders, the Empire developed several prototype interdictor ships, including the Immobilizer 418 cruiser. The Empire would use gravity well projection technology to protect the deep core security zone. See, at the center of the galaxy, even more central than Coruscant itself, was the system of Empress Teta, bordered by black holes and nebulas. The deep core was relatively difficult to navigate to anyway. There were only a handful of hyperspace lanes that allowed you access to this region of space, and so it kind of made it perfect for interdiction. The deep core was considered a very sensitive region for the Empire, and many of the Empire's black projects were based out of this area. The 15th Deep Core Reserve Force was one of the first line units to receive access to the Immobilizer 418, and they would basically be placed at checkpoints in and out of the deep core, and they would control all traffic. Moff Wilhelm Tarkin gained an interest for this technology when his own personal corvette, the Carrion Spike, equipped with state-of-the-art cloaking technology and hyperdrive, was stolen. Tarkin had intended to use the Mobilizer 418 and also the frigate known as the CC-7700 to basically stop the Carrion Spike and trap it, and hopefully take it back. Now, the way these ships worked was they would use their gravity well projectors to create a huge artificial mass shadow, which appeared on ship sensors as planets, stars, or even black holes. This in turn would trigger the fail-safe mechanism on all hyperdrives that prevent them from crashing into such objects at FTL speeds, which of course would be fatal. So after hearing about this technology, me along with a lot of other Star Wars fans thought, well, this was the perfect solution to the Empire's problem, which was not being able to catch up to the rebels, who were constantly using those pesky hit-and-run tactics, right? If the rebellion only stayed and fight, they surely would have been defeated by the Empire. So this was kind of the thing that could have saved the Empire. Or is it? Because I don't think it's actually that simple, and after thinking about this, doing a little bit more research, I realized that maybe the Interdictor wasn't such a good idea after all. Like most weapons, whether it be Mandalorian Beskar versus blasters or Cortosis versus lightsabers, the gravity well projector gambit works best in a vacuum of experience and expectations. The more it was used, the more effective it was at stopping the rebellion's military activities, the more incentive the rebel high command had to develop countermeasures and poke holes in the platform's weaknesses. And one of the easiest ways to make sure your ship is able to avoid being affected by the artificial gravity well projector is turning off the failsafe on your hyperdrive sensor suite. Basically, your hyperdrive sensor will detect any type of gravity mass that's in front of your ship and pull you out prematurely so you don't slam into something and die. This isn't an easy task that can be done by a DIY tinkerer, but the mechanics and engineers employed by the Rebellion should be able to figure it out. Now, this did take a bit of preparation and time to prepare. You can just flip a switch on and off. But more importantly, if you turn off a failsafe like this, you put your crew at huge risk. Let's say you do jump into hyperspace and you miscalculate, or there's some celestial object that no one charted, suddenly you don't have that system protecting you from slamming headfirst into something and killing you. You can survive being pulled out of hyperspace by an interdictor. You cannot survive colliding into a moon or a sun or a black hole. And it's one thing to risk a single X-Wing. Turning off the hyperspace collision system on a cruiser with thousands of people on board was a very serious moral decision to make. Now, eventually, I think Rebel engineers and mechanics would figure out a way to insert a quick switch that would allow you to turn this system on and off, with relative ease, so you're flying with it on most of the time. Or better yet, you could adjust your sensor suite or upgrade them to be able to figure out the difference between an interdiction field and an actual celestial body. But that was really just half the problem. You see, some ships' gravity well generators were so powerful that they could physically just pull ships out of hyperspace. They did this by disrupting the hyperspace tunnels being carved by a ship. And so the Rebels' only countermeasure in this case is by boosting the quantum field generator on their vessel, or at least that's theoretically what they could do. The null quantum field generator basically maintains these hyperspace tunnels. If you put more power into them, it's harder to collapse the tunnel being made, even if you are using artificial gravity forces. This would require a significant overhaul of the ship's power generator, which of course would make the ship less deadly and more vulnerable. The Rebellion, as far as we know, never made such modifications to their ships in response to the Imperial threat, for the simple reason that interdictors were just not that common in the Imperial fleet. There's also the big problem with the cost of these ships, because these are basically all first generation vessels. This technology is a lot less developed than it should be. A lot of this has to do with the High Republic's policy on it in their academy system. This was a huge mistake and missed opportunity. And so even the smallest interdictor ships like the Detainer CC-2200 or the frigate, the CC-7700, were far more expensive than ships of their class. And even if you were able to scale up the production of these vessels, you still had many technical and engineering challenges to smooth out before these ships were more stable. A lot of the components and mechanisms were still prototype stage. For instance, you had something known as the overcurrent resistor mechanism that prevented gravity fields from getting too strong and out of control. These were finicky machines, and they were extremely important for any type of operation these ships were carrying out. During one mission, when an immobilizer 14 was used in an attempt to capture the carry-on spike, the resistor mechanism failed, and basically the immobilizer pulled several starships out of hyperspace on a collision course with the Imperial fleet. A Mon Calamari luxury liner known as the Stellar Vision actually collided into an Imperial ship and started venting passengers into space. Roughly around 1,100 people died, and this was captured all on the HoloNets. This was a huge blow to this weapon system. People just didn't like it. The public opinion had soured on interdiction. It was also relatively hard to determine what ships you were pulling out of hyperspace. This wasn't a precise weapon. It was more like just casting a giant net into the river, which of course causes all sorts of complications because, again, if you're operating in a very busy commercial or civilian hyperspace lane, you could be pissing a lot of people off in an attempt to actually capture the real foe. In the incident we mentioned before with the Stellar Vision, out of all the ships that were taken out of hyperspace, the carry-on spike was not even, one of them. And so, as you're probably beginning to see, this weapon had very limited cause uses and required a bit of planning or setup to be properly deployed. Because of costs and the limitations of the technology, this wasn't something that could just be assigned on all patrols. And because of the danger pulling a ship out of hyperspace involves, you couldn't just do this willy-nilly and set up checkpoints everywhere and basically stop the flow of galactic commerce and trade. This would significantly piss off the people in the core, and you could start riots, basically. Also, especially with the smaller interdictors, sometimes pulling the wrong ships out of hyperspace was a problem. You see, these interdictors, the big ones, the small ones, they all had 4 gravity well generators. These were big humps that made them very noticeable. At the same time, these gravity wells took a lot of power, and so that's less power for the weapon systems, the shields, and this made this class of ship especially vulnerable. So if you do pull a squadron of rebel starfighters into real space with this thing, you have to also have a fleet standing by to deal with it. Otherwise, as happened in many cases, the interdictor will be destroyed in short order, at which point the insurgents can easily escape once again. In Zero BBY, Luke Skywalker, while piloting the luxury yacht Desert Jewel, was pulled out of hyperspace by an immobilizer 14 and made quick work of the ship's defenses and destroyed it with a seismic charge. Skywalker had been briefed about the immobilizer cruiser's capabilities. The Rebel Alliance had run into the ship frequently and understood the ship's weaknesses quite intimately and created several action plans on how to take it down. The immobilizer 418 would eventually be replaced by the Interdictor Class Star Destroyer, a larger, stronger version of the previous interdictor. These are quite rare vessels, and they did pose a significant threat to the rebellion. Grand Admiral Thrawn brilliantly used 2 of these Star Destroyers during the Battle of Atollon at 1,129 meters long and equipped with 20 quad lasers and 2 TIE fighter squadrons. They were relatively difficult for your average rebel fleet to destroy. He managed to trap the entirety of the Musashi Group and Phoenix Cell, which represented a significant amount of alliances to restore the Republic's military assets at the time. Thrawn's 7th Fleet was able to hold this much smaller and less powerful rebel fleet in charge as he destroyed their ships one at a time. Had Thrawn been victorious here, it could have completely changed the course of the war and prevented the disastrous Battle of Yavin 4 from happening, delaying the true rebel uprising another decade or so. With the hubris of one of his officers, Admiral Constantine, who commanded one of the interdictors, led to great disaster for Imperial forces. Instead of holding position in the rear of the Imperial formation, Constantine decided to charge the rebel lines in order to gain personal glory. Did I mention how this was kind of a support vessel and not a frontline capital ship? As a result, Rebel Commander Jun Sato, leader of Phoenix Squadron, rammed a Quasar Fire-class cruiser into the interdictor, killing it. This allowed a few rebels to escape and call for additional help, which came in the form of a Mandalorian Commando attack game. They launched an extravehicular attack on the second interdictor and managed to destroy the ship's gravity well generators. These gravity well generators were easy targets because they were extremely visible. It's kind of hard to hide the telltale bump on these ships, and the amount of physical armor on these generators were quite light because it hampered the gravity field these machines generated. As a result, if you could get under the deflector shields, you could easily destroy these vulnerable generators, causing the system to fail. Usually this led to catastrophic destruction of the entire ship as well. So as you can see, these interdictors definitely had their place in combat, but situations like the Battle of Atollon was rare. For one, Thrawn had spent months tracking down the location of this hidden rebel base and carefully planned this entire battle and gathered the resources necessary for the attack. A similar strategy could have also been used during the Imperial attack on Hoth. The problem with these interdictors is they were extremely specialized in what they could do. And more importantly, the gravity well generators were so energy intensive that these ships were quite vulnerable by themselves, which presented a clear target for the Rebellion to attack. The Rebel fleet wasn't designed for long engagements and heavy slugfests with Imperial battleships, but their entire complement of starfighters and many of their capital ships were designed to strike quick at a single target and do a massive amount of damage. So you could say that their forces were well suited to destroying interdictors. Ultimately, the tactical abilities of the interdictor did not justify the widespread production of these vessels. This was never really a mass-produced common ship of the line. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.